Yeah, it's recording.
I'll
Meeting. The first order of business is to approve the minutes from the January 12th meeting. Does anyone have comments or corrections about those? I'll accept a motion to approve.
Motion
I
to
move
approve.
we approve.
second.
Is somebody taking notes of this meeting? Gordon, are you doing that?
I can do that again in my minimalist.
Yes,
way.
well, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay,
I'll
but
do-
that was a vote, so you want to know, you
Right.
know, who made the motion and who seconded.
Who did make the motion?
Stella,
Oh, we both did.
and Don seconded it.
Okay.
Okay, good. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion is carried. Are there any additions to the agenda? Okay, hearing none. Our first order of business is the letter that we got from William Betts of West Cornwall, who's the guy who now owns Yutzler's and the Farnsworth Bookshop. Now, I don't know, Gordon, whether you and Steve want to talk about, I think you went to take a look at this property, didn't you?
Yeah, we have, I've met Mr. Betts soon after he came to town. A lot of enthusiasm there, some local connections and expertise. And he has bought both properties, the Utsler store and the former bookstore, with the intention to reuse them, reopen them as some sorts of commercial space. I think he is acutely aware of the limitations on the properties, one of which is the lack of modern facilities, especially in the bookstore. So anyway, I said, and plus the town, so we got two letters. One, he expressed an interest, as had the previous owners, in acquiring the little piece of property next to the bookstore, between the bookstore and the bridge that the town owns, which was the site of the original West Cornwall Firehouse. And because the bookstore site is so constrained, especially for parking, in addition to well and septic, it's a natural fit. The town hasn't done much with that property since the firehouse moved up the road. So we thought the board has endorsed the idea of bringing that to a town meeting. Again, trying to do what we can to make the properties more usable. And if we can get a couple more parking spots there, so much the better. So we are prepared to take that to a town meeting.
Gordon, how big is that property?
Say again?
How big is that property?
It's like,
2/10 of an acre.
thank you. Yeah, I was gonna say 2/10 of an acre. It's microscopic. It's, I'm not sure what the widest point is, probably 30 feet, something like that. A lot of it is also, as a lot of properties are, the DOT right of way is very wide there. So you're up against the books. You're literally up against the bookstore, the brook, and the DOT. So again, it seemed like a natural fit, or at least it seemed like enough of a natural fit to have the town consider that transfer. And again, we're sympathetic to Mr. Betts's efforts to bring some vitality back to those buildings. When we first started this discussion, the thought of businesses and revitalizing West Cornwall was more theoretical. Now it's actually begun, not just with him, but some of the other activities. So anyway, that was one letter, and the selectmen are looking at that, and we're probably going to bring that to a town meeting in April, along with some other the things that we weren't able to do last fall. And so we hope to have an April town meeting to do that. We still have to go to the Planning and Zoning Commission, and before we do that, and I think we'll also get a positive vote from the Board of Finance. So that's one letter was about the West Cornwall lot, firehouse lot. Second letter was expressing a willingness to have the town consider his lot in between the post office and Utzler's. Most of that is owned by him and went with the original Utzler store. That is the site of the former mansion house. And at some point I will dig out the pictures of the old mansion house, which was a 3-story building, at least the size of the Wish House, if not bigger. That was a fairly famous hotel that stood there for many years, had a barn stable behind it, and burnt in the 1920s. Spectacular. And what's even more spectacular, there was anything left of West Cornwall after that went up. But I think that also was some of the inspiration for putting the West Cornwall Firehouse in right across the street. But that's speculation. I wasn't here then. So anyway, it shows how all those properties are sort of tied together. There was, when we bring those pictures out, it is amazing if you look at the historic commercial / industrial use of West Cornwall, how much activity was there, business activity. And again, some of that was because of the train. But anyway, so there's sort of like a new generation of ideas there, and I don't want to oversell it. Steve, I think, is on. We did get a survey of the neighboring property, which has survey of this property. And again, it's a tentative offer. It has to work for him as well as work for the town, and we won't know all the details. But I believe Steve has looked at that. We did also look at the Farnsworth property up the hill. Steve, do you want to buzz in with any preliminary reports? I mean, I know it's all tentative. I only got to the survey a couple of days ago, but
yeah. And again, it's not a true, it doesn't a really true boundary survey topography. There's no topography on it, but the property that part of the property is clearly vacant. And it appears to have enough room to site something there. Same thing as across the street. We have to deal with the property lines, DOT right of way, which actually seems to go through the center of the post office and practically a good portion of his building as well. So, but having said that, it still appears that there's enough property there to site something. So,
yeah, so
and although it's not ideal in terms of the fact it's uphill from some of the areas that are proposed to be served, but having said that, it seems to be a better site than most of which we've looked at so far.
Mm-hmm. But Steve, the fact that it's uphill out of the flood zone, as Gordon has pointed out, but it's going to mean that we have to install more pumping locations. Isn't that so?
That's up to the design. You certainly will have to pump to it from some of the properties that might be served by this potential project, certainly. But the cost of that, I believe we can absorb within our budget. So it's not a killer in terms of the cost.
Okay.
An evaluation eventually would be done to determine whether a single pump station might be needed or individual grinder pumps which serve individual homes may be more cost effective than a completely separate pump station. But it's clearly uphill from some of the properties, to be potentially served.
Steve, I thought there was an issue with the individual grinder pumps and maintenance.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean exactly by that, but the way of the USDA, if in fact this project gets funding through USDA, which we can talk about that in a second, then in the past, historically, if a property has a grinder pump on it, if you install the grinder pump and take advantage of the grant from USDA to install that grinder pump, then in that case, the town or the governing authority would be responsible to maintain that pump for a certain period of time, like I think it's 20 years or something like that. Having said that, if there's a separate pump station where everything flows by gravity to a pump station, then certainly the town would be responsible to maintain that alternatively.
Okay.
That if you don't take grant money for the grinder pumps and the individual property owner buys their own pump or the town buys their pump for them to take advantage of cost effectiveness, then the town would not have to maintain the pump. But in most cases, it seems the best and the property owners seem to be acceptable that if the town will maintain the pump, it's a good thing for them.
Steve, your
Okay.
project in Winston, didn't that require lots of pumping?
Yeah, that's the largest low pressure, these are called low pressure sewers with these grinder pumps. And that system around Highland Lake is the largest low pressure system in the eastern United States. It's
Wow.
something close to 300 grinder pumps all around. Every home around that lake has got a grinder pump.
So there are 300 houses hooked up to a system with grinder pumps in Winston, and that's been up. And how far is that effluent pumped?
I couldn't tell you offhand, but it's a mile or more actually. If you think about Highland Lake, how long it is, I mean, it's a pretty long lake.
It's a big lake.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I don't need to get into the technical details how grinder pumps work, but they don't. The pump that's at the end of the system doesn't have to pump all the way to the discharge point, which is a mile or
Right.
more away. It basically pumps it a little ways, and then the next pump kicks in and kicks it a little further, and next pump kicks it a little further, and it's kind of pushes the wastewater slowly towards where it discharges ultimately.
Steve, I know that lake well, and I know the project too, because I had a business there. Where does it discharge?
Well, it discharges in two places. Basically, at the end of there's an East Wakefield part and a West Wakefield part, and both of them discharge towards I would say, the northerly end of the lake, where there's a conventional gravity sewer that runs down to the center of town.
Okay, but they're pumping uphill that mile or whatever it
Right.
is. I mean,
In fact, some
a
people
significant distance.
In fact, it's kind of interesting because it's entirely a low pressure system. Some houses are elevated above the road where the main sewer line is, and some homes are actually pumping downhill. But that's how the system is designed.
Okay, don't want to get lost in the
Right.
weeds there, but yeah. Anyway, it's doable.
Definitely doable.
It's much less hookups, much less distance.
Yes. We designed a system in Southwick, which is 180 pumps and as well as 6 pump stations, but that's a huge system. But
Mhm.
technology works very well.
Good. So we'll
Okay.
just take it
Is
one
that-
step at a time.
Right.
Okay. So right now, are we ready to move on from Mr. Betts and his offer? Okay.
And Lisa, I do have another question about that for Gordon. Will the Board of Selectmen be considering a swap rather than a purchase?
No, I think we'd already expressed interest. I mean, and I can't speak for the board, but we'd already expressed interest in selling that to the previous owner for a nominal amount. It's assessed, I think, right now, isn't it, Priscilla, for under $1,000 by the town assessor?
Oh, it's
So-
under 500 is my memory.
Okay. It's under 500. So our feeling, I think, is that the project of the firehouse sort of stands alone on its own merits. And I think whatever we can do to help him in his efforts to establish a foothold here in town will be remembered. But we don't have like a master plan to swap him a piece of his parking lot for the firehouse lot, because there's no real comparison there in value. And I think the thing, even if he hadn't been willing to generously offer consideration of his property, we would go ahead on its own merits of offering him that for the town to decide, because that seemed to be, it would meet the objective of helping, that bookstore come back.
Mhm. Okay.
Well, Lisa, excuse me.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I would urge the board to consider that possibility. I mean, as he pointed out, his property, the bookstore, is worth diddly shit to him without this project. And so he's not being driven entirely by, he's got some self-interest there. And I think it's a leverage point for the town that the board ought to consider on behalf of all the taxpayers in town if a swap could be made. that would be advantageous and save money.
Okay,
Does
so
nobody
anyway,
else-
so noted, we're a ways
nobody
away
else
from.
thinks that there's an opportunity to leverage
Well,
this?
yeah, there's a leverage, but I think there's also a way to cooperate. I mean, I think we are working with someone here who we want to work with as opposed to leverage. And I think ultimately it'd be up to, the board will consider those thoughts as we draft the town meeting call, but it's ultimately up to the town meeting to decide how to do these things. It'd be nice if we had everything figured out, but realistically, we won't probably know even by the time we vote on the sewer thing, whether ultimately that will be a perfect site. Because it requires a lot of engineering to get to that point. So anyway, I think, anyway, that's sort of a subject for another time and in the town meeting, but it is connected. But as we've said before, that I think that project, as we've talked to other owners of that property, the purchase or the consideration of the purchase of the firehouse to that lot is stands on its own merits, and it's again not super, it's still a big lift to bring that place back. And it's still subject to planning and zoning and a bunch of other restrictions. So whatever we can do to push these projects forward, I think we probably will do.
Thank you.
Okay, Gordon, this next section where we continue our discussion about the checklist and the timeline, I have something printed out from the last meeting, which lays that out. Are there major changes to that or anything you want to bring to our attention?
No, I think we have had this working group of Lisa, Todd, Barbara, and myself working on some of these nitty gritty issues. Mostly the financial part is what we accomplished this last month. And so we basically have on the checklist financial issues and estimates, large and small, the explanatory text, the voting procedures and the schedule, the language for voting. I did talk to the bond counsel yesterday, who felt that the language for the referendum will be similar to what he proposed last fall when we tried to get this going and didn't. So the language seems to be pretty straightforward. The schedule, as I've already said, we've got a tentative outline of that, of having a town meeting, informational meeting, town meeting in June and a referendum in July. There has to be a 2-week separation between an in-person town meeting or the town meeting and the actual vote. And we're working, on that assumption that will give us enough time if we get the information together. Then the next thing, we had voting procedures, absentee ballots, working through information on that with the town clerk. What's sort of interesting on that, and if people want to know some of the details of what's going on, that as you may remember, there was a lot of absentee ballot voting last November in the big election. That was due to a special act of the legislature to grant people no fault, everybody was able to get an absentee ballot on demand. It was on demand absentee ballot voting, the way some other states do it. Connecticut historically has restricted absentee ballots to basically medical conditions and absence, and being unable to actually be at the polling place. So it's restrictive. It's more restrictive than what we had last fall. And I believe also people have to apply in person to get the ballots and make a statement that they can't possibly make it to the poll. So again, there's whole, it's from another time, but there's, a strong preference, at least in the statutes, to have an in-person vote as opposed to an absentee ballot vote. for municipal affairs. So, and Vera Deneen, the town clerk, just said today that she heard from the Secretary of State's office that the state is not allowing, at this point, they're not allowing increased absentee balloting. So anyway, we have to just, it's basically like all the referendums we've had for the town on town issues. There will be absentee ballots available, but we have to clearly understand the procedures, the eligibility, and of course, property owners, taxpayers are eligible. So the pool is much bigger than the elector pool. So anyway, but that's all manageable. And then we have what we focused on this month with Barbara Herbst's help. We looked at the financial numbers again, and Barbara did update her talking finances, one-page explanation of where the town is at financially. So that's of the macro picture of how this would impact the mill rate. And also we did get Steve to do a deeper explanation of some of the operation maintenance costs. So we have an estimate of something like $150,000 for the debt service and about $100,000 for the
Operations.
operation and maintenance. So that's a split, combined cost of $250,000, which again it's a lot of money. It would be approximately 4% of the town expenditures, but because we have other things, other bonds retiring, and we have we have time to plan for this expenditure, it may not by itself create a real tax increase. So that's sort of the big picture. We also looked at some of the if you look at those numbers, and then you look at the user survey that was done 2 years ago, which we can update. Most of the people that signed on most of the people are still there. Some of the people that were there at the time and were either negative or ambivalent have been replaced by such people as Mr. Betts and Mr. Ingersoll acquiring some property, plus some of the properties that are there now have more intensive use, such as the old pottery store. So if anything, the demand is what it was, which is about 15 units. So even if those units, people were charged $1,000, which is on the upper side of what we're talking about, that would be $15,000 a year for the operation, towards the operation maintenance thing, which we feel should go towards some sort of reserve fund to help pay for the maintenance. It's still a very small part of the $100,000 budget. So again, the town is going to be the major backstop of the carrying cost for the operation. And even if we got each of the 15 users to pay $3,500 a piece, which is what we felt was the average, that would accumulate about $50,000, which compared to the $5 million cost of the project is a small amount. But we knew going into this that the town would pay the lion's share of the project, both the cost of construction and the operation and maintenance costs. But I think we've got tighter numbers now that will show that's still the case and sort of quantifies things a little better.
Gordon, could we consider charging more than $3,500 to commercial hookups versus?
Yeah, I think we
hookups?
made that clear that especially if people had a use, and we're gonna have to dig into that a little bit more. But if people had a heavy use, certainly we can set a charge. There's a fancy acronym for this, Steve. It's like average daily user, and that's just assuming your average house. If you exceed that in your use, especially if it's a thing like a restaurant that would require more water and effluent, then that could be doubled or tripled depending on the use. One disadvantage we have is we do not have water meters to scientifically charge people the way they do maybe down in Kent, according to Barbara, because there's a lot of variation there in users there between Kent School and some of the big institutional users there and the individual houses, and then you have, you know, a vibrant commercial center. So there's rates that are are very, very varied. So
And
yes,
I was
yes.
referring specifically to the initial hookup, which you referred to as $3,500. I mean, maybe making it 15 or 20,000 for a commercial hookup.
We could do that, but again, I think we'd have to have a real reason to do that, because even if it's a commercial hookup, it depends. If they're not some commercial buildings like a retail shop would require less, would use the system less than somebody's house. So again, we're trying to, I mean, the whole point of this is to try to bring part of the point of this is to bring West Cornwall back commercially. I would be open though to look at multiples hookup fees depending on anticipated use. And if somebody decides to hook up later, then the cost of hooking up later may be greater than if you got in on the ground floor.
Yeah, and I mean, it isn't.
But that's
just-
all discussion. And even if
It isn't just usage, Gordon. It could be the increased value of the commercial properties that they'd be willing to, that we should consider.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of this is also, if people do get hooked up to this, their properties will be worth more. And I don't think that will be lost on the assessor. So there will be indirect payments through increased tax assessments, which may, I'm not sure they're going to rival. Well, it's not inconceivable that the people are going to pay more in an increased tax than they actually are in the user fee. If you have something that's undervalued now and it becomes valued. So, I mean, I think that's going to happen. Plus, I think also there will be a increase. Well, anyway, we can talk about real estate values a little bit, but as we probably know, the getting at this is hard somewhat, because also everybody's property value is about to be revalued starting this October, and we know that Cornwall, the values of sales in Cornwall are in the top. The increase has been in the top 10 in the state of Connecticut. So you're going to see, everybody's going to see their real estate assessments change somewhat. Their tax bill may not. I mean, overall, the tax bills, the whole sum of taxation will not increase, but individual, you may see, you'll certainly see, you will see individuals shift a lot more due to the reevaluation and the changes in the real estate market than you will actually because of this project. So, and I think, you know, as that property there becomes more commercially viable and West Cornwall comes back, that helps the town on the revenue end.
I had one comment. This is Joe Pryor.
Yes, the Board of
We're
Finance.
saying, yeah, what if you had just the commercial hookups put in a water meter, right? And we would monitor their water meter, even though you're not charging them for water, you're using that as a scale with which to charge them.
You could.
Anyway, just a comment.
Could be. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these things are going to have to be worked out, you know. But the good thing is that if this passes in this summer, there's going to be at least a year of design and regulatory review, that the mechanisms of charging, and we have estimates now, but we're going to have to do a bunch of work to figure out the right mechanisms to charge and assess this fairly.
I would be happy to serve on any subcommittee.
That's great. That's great. Yeah.
Folks, do you think we've done a good enough job of representing or talking about the pollution to the river? I brought this up at the last meeting. But, you know, between the flush and the river, it seems like we're talking, you know, kind of trapped in a bit about, you know, what we can do and can't do. I'm not sure we've heard from all the people in the town, other than that, the very large town meeting we had. Everyone kind of raised their hands because, you know, do you like Christmas? Of course I like Christmas. But in any case, I'm wondering if we're doing a good enough job as far as presenting our, you know, our project.
That's a great point, David. I think we can switch into the explanatory text, which is part of that, but not all of that. And you have gotten some inserts and documents on that. One of them talks about a Rocky Hill school project. And it's important to know that what we can say as a town is fairly, is somewhat constrained by state election law. We can't tell people to vote yes. We can tell people thoroughly what are the benefits to the town of the project. And we can take out the Rocky Hill School and put in West Cornwall and sort of set the stage of what the current situation is, what's deficient. And certainly the, you know, having cesspools near a river or near water stream and near people's wells is not a great setup. So I think the benefits to improving the system and getting a good explanatory text, and Barbara and Lisa have volunteered to take a crack at that next month. That's next month's big project, is trying to get something to the bond council to look at, that sort of clearly lays out not just the cost, but the benefits of these things. And again, thank you, Jonathan, for putting that up there. And again, we're not building a school, but we are proposing a municipal project. And these are kind of making the case of why are we even bringing this to the townspeople? What is currently happening? There they have 7 portable classrooms, and they, you know, whatever, they had their deficiencies. We have our deficiencies in West Cornwall, and those will be enumerated in the explanatory text and at the informational meetings. And hopefully we will have, to go along with this, some renderings of scale. I think one of the issues too is people are concerned about the Danbury scale older sewer plants as opposed to the modern technology. I think that's a case that needs to be made too, as far as how these newer systems can be incorporated into communities without the impact of your grandparents' old sewer plants, which are similar to what they have like down in Kent. This is new technology, I mean, newish technology, much more smaller scale and much more contained. So again, I think there's a bunch of explanations and a bunch of information that can be put out there to make the case. And we'll try to draft something up next month and present it to the bond council, present it to the committee to look at and see, does it say enough? Does it state the case? But I think the river part is a strong part of that. And I think Steve probably has some, you know, I mean, I think it's important to remember too, that the river starts in Pittsfield and Great Barrington and North Canaan and Salisbury. And so there are some older, major, much bigger sewer operations that discharge into the river before it even gets here. And hopefully we'll have the cleanest plant on the river. That will actually, the water going in will be better than the water, certainly the water that's in there now. And we will, you know, be treating it successfully, much better than it's being done now. So it's our, you know, it's our little part towards improving water quality in the river, which has increased in the last years, but there's still ways to go.
Gordon, maybe we'd have a better chance if we had a coalition of these towns where we all got together and, put together the studies and, with the coalition of, I think you mentioned 4 or 5 or 6 towns going all the way up to Pittsfield, maybe, that we'd have a stronger case and we would be able to succeed together.
Well, I think there are people independent of the town that have a very strong interest in river quality, that can be encouraged to participate in the process. This is-
HVA,
Yeah.
HVA for
but-
one thing. And
the fly fish-
Torrington area Health, I know, has opinions about this too, so.
I know, there is a Housatonic River Commission that does represent the towns up and down the river, and we just had a little session with them on recreation on the river upcoming season. So again, in outreach to them ahead of our vote, I think would be good. And
Gordon,
again,
didn't we say at the last meeting that Don Bachman brought up some issues where we were saying that really we do not have a strong river pollution case to make, and we didn't do we don't have any real data because we didn't do any of the real testing at the time. So we don't have good data to do that. And that's probably the weakest part of our case. And that basically, I think Don's comment was that this is an economic argument. And I think, David, to get involved in what's going on in Massachusetts and all of that, we had agreed, and Torrington Area Health said they were not going to press the pollution part of it. I think it's the weakest part of our case. It may have some pizzazz politically, but I don't think we don't have the data, do we, Steve?
No, actually, Joanne, you're pretty much dead on. So empirically, we can show that there's pollution getting to the river. The effect on the river is a whole different story. It's small potatoes compared to, Pittsfield and some of the other upper reaches of the situation. But it is an economic thing, really. But David's good point's well taken, that clean up your own house kind of thing.
correct. We have some obligation.
Yeah.
Obviously having cesspools above the river, there's pretty clear where
Exactly.
that's going. And again, I think there are people that are interested in what we're doing, because this village has regional importance too. So I think it's important to reach out to people that care about the river. It's one of the town's most important resources, one of the region's most important resources. So again, it's
as part of our argument, then maybe we should do some more testing.
we could do testing, or we could maybe ask I know that people at DEP, although they were not going to force us to do something, can probably write. We can ask them for some. Opinion or whatever about the general situation there. Because again, as Steve said, there's cities of 20,000 people using this river above stream. So that's the reality. But again, I like the idea that we're doing our part. And going forward, some of those cities may become under orders to do more than they're doing now. Yeah.
I think we may be done with that section of the agenda, unless there's anybody wants to comment on Ruth Epstein's piece in the Waterbury paper. I don't know what we need to say about that, but we touched on voting procedures and that the bond counts, we're going to work on the narrative. So now I have here report from Steve.
Oh, no. not me.
Yeah,
I don't have much to report, but I would like to make a comment quickly on Joanne's comment earlier about the spreading of the cost out. And I can tell you historically, most towns, when there's two costs with this project. There's the upfront capital cost, and then there's the operation and maintenance costs. And typically, operation and maintenance costs are borne partially by the towns or partially by the users. And Gordon, you're absolutely right. We have no water meters here, so that's another issue, but that can be addressed. But the upfront costs, in terms of who get charged what for the connection cost, typically towns have they look at what they call equivalent dwelling units, Gordon, which is what kind of you were talking about.
right.
And they assess people a cost for the connection cost based on their equivalent dwelling units. And every town that's got a sewer system has a formula for that. And in fact, you typically, commercial people and others that have a benefit financially, not just their property values, but benefit financially from having the availability of the sewers, they may have more equivalent dwelling units than a single family home, even though their water usage may not be the same. So that's something to keep in mind when you get to that point in time, when you're talking about connection costs. That's all.
Yeah, and am I right, Steve? I think a lot of these rates are reviewed by the state. I mean, we can't
Oh, they
just,
all are. Yeah.
so we can't
can't
all of a
think-
sudden
Yeah.
say, hey, you lost your sewer, give us $40,000.
Right.
I mean, they have to have some balance of affordability, because after all, we want
Yes.
people to be
There are some
on it.
some rules of thumb for that, actually. So
No.
in terms of how much you can, because it is a benefit assessment. The property has to clearly benefit from the project, which it will, but how much is it worth? And then there is some thought about how a certain property is valued at $200,000. How much could it benefit from having a sewer in front of it? But that's kind of down the road in terms of how you allocate the costs. Another point was I was meeting last week with the USDA on a project we're doing up in Norfolk, rebuilding their sewer system from the 1800s. And the comments that they made were that with the new administration, the funding looks very, very favorable. They thought there would be, and again, not sure how factual this is, but their impression was with the new administration, United States administration, that there would be favorable funding for projects such as this. Whether that can increase your grant percentage or not, I'm not sure. That's where other people can get involved, Gordon, from your state federal legislators, senators, and that sort of thing. But the funding looks very, very favorable, I should say, as a bottom line.
That's good. Okay. Selectmen, Board of Finance, Treasurer, any comments from that quarter?
I think we're good. We're going to put this on our,
Yeah.
we're going to put this on our agenda item just to officially, say we're on track for the schedule we talked about. And Barbara's going to review some of these cost estimates with the Board of Finance at our next joint meeting. So we're very much keeping financial people in the loop.
Good.
And again, I think I said that I went over all this checklist with the bond counsel, and I said, are we missing? Is there something we should be doing that we're not? And he said, you've got it pretty well. These are the points you should be covering at this point. So.
Yeah, and
I'm
it
good.
seems to me we're just about where we ought to be on most of this stuff. We've got work to do, but it's a progression. We pick up more information, we add it, that opens up another door, we check that out. It's just going to be sort of a constant thing for a while. We may never wind up with all the answers. Sometimes you can't.
Can I ask what would happen, Gordon, when we originally came up with this $4.9 million one? Part of the discussion was that the rules changed when a project went to over $5 million. So we wanted to keep the estimate under that. So what happens when this project costs $8 million?
What happens is it doesn't get built unless the town would approve more money. If
Yeah.
if we go to the taxpayers and ask for $5 million and it comes up I mean, you won't really know until you open those bids up. And I asked Steve that little question today, because I mean, it's just from the layman's standpoint, there's a lot of construction activity in Western Connecticut right now. We're having a bit of a boom, mostly residential. And does any of that escalate costs or whatever else? But the short answer to your question is we go to the town, we ask for money. If those bids come in over that, then we have to go back. That's what happened at Woodridge Lake. This is a much smaller project than what they're proposing at Woodridge Lake and Goshen. And they had to basically go back to the drawing boards because their project bids were so high compared to their estimate. But Steve has reassured me that we're in the ballpark to getting done what we need to get done.
Yeah.
And again, he spends his time dealing with these type of projects,
As you,
and dealing with the USDA. So I mean, the narrow question, we go for $5 million, that's our budget. The other question is, Steve, how your basis for confidence is.
well,
Yeah.
I mean, it's an estimate clearly at this point, and I can tell you right now, there's multiple steps you're going to go through even before you go to bid, that you'll get refined estimates based on the actual design. Nobody's designed anything yet. So once the design is getting further along, 70% complete or whatever, there'll be refined cost opinions on this, and that'll tell you at that point whether it looks good, not so good, whatever.
That was the difference. I mean, looking at the Rocky Hill thing, there was so much specificity in that. And we don't have that kind of specificity. So I don't understand how we can go out for this.
Well, I'm pretty sure standing behind whatever one-page letter we have, we do have Steve's body of work, which is pretty detailed. And we've, any other thoughts on that, Steve?
No, just that I think that once you get it, I think you need to, my opinion is the town needs to decide overall if this project is a positive thing for the town, as a benefit for many reasons. And if it is not a benefit, then they'll vote no. If they think it's a benefit, they'll vote yes. And at that point, you'll get into the design of the project. And at that point, you have a refined idea of the cost of that point. And at that point, you make a decision. Do we proceed ahead or do we pull the plug at this point?
Then there's the
It also depends a bit. There's, I said, until you get a signed bid, you don't really know the answer to that. I mean, we've done a bunch of bridges in the last 5 years, and fairly similar designs can vary a lot depending on the construction season and who's hungry for the work and who's not. We've gotten some incredible deals, and we've had some bids that we've had to reject because they came in higher than we thought. So
I agree
again,
in reality, Gordon, also, I mean, the economy might be booming in terms of construction, like you said, for residential, but it's not booming in terms of the heavy industry field. Like
correct.
Bridges and other things, treatment plants, that type of thing. It's not booming at all. So
Right.
So, yeah, so we'd be in a good position
yeah, to me, it's an
from that
opportunity
aspect, yeah.
if you're going to move ahead at all.
Right. And you've got the thing about the interest rates are low now. I mean, that's another consideration. If you're going to borrow, this is a good time.
A lot of things have been said here. The question is whether, the chicken or the egg, Do you put the money up? Do you decide on the money or do you decide on the project? It's been said, and I think it's correct what both Steve and Gordon have said. We're looking at up to $5 million. And that was determined for some reason, that it's somewhat complicated, but it was determined. And that appears to be the working number. We present something to the town, to the townspeople, taxpayers. Is the town of Cornwall willing to expend this kind of money for this kind of project? As this is what Steve is saying, and you get a yes, or you get a, for these reasons, you get a positive response or you get a negative response. If it's negative, the show's over. If it's positive, you continue to move forward and design the project more fully. At some point, it goes out to bid. If the bid comes in at $8 million, it doesn't happen. If the bid comes in at 3.5 or 4.5, it does happen. And something in between, I'm not quite sure what would happen at 5.1 or 5.2, but that remains to be seen. But you can't define the whole project without determining whether the town is willing to do it. Is the town willing to spend up to $5 million? And that's really the question that's the next step. The next step is, in fact, getting an answer to the question, the big question, is the town willing to spend that kind of money on this concept of a project? And then after that's determined, yes or no, then you really sharpen it and determine the details of the project.
From the town meeting that we had, I think, you know, there was good information presented, and I think we kind of got a huge raise of hands that said that they were in favor. But I think the real problem we have right now are the people that live in the town of West Cornwall, in the village rather. So, you know, that I think we have to work more on and try to present something that they feel comfortable about. And maybe we have failed a bit, maybe not, I don't know.
That figure was $4,985,000 was the last figure we had.
That's
So
right.
it is
Yeah.
just under that. But when you ask that question, which is the only way you could really do it, you open up a kettle of worms. We have to be ready with a lot of answers to a lot of things, because they're not going to just say, oh yeah, okay, 5 million, you know, there's going to be a lot of questions, which is a little intimidating, but you know, I don't know, just a thought.
Yeah. Well, there's no other way really than to follow the steps, the progression of events that Steve has been through this many, many, many times. And I think, you know, it's a little hard for us to wrap our heads around it, because we'd like to see something as concrete and explainable as possible. But that apparently isn't quite the way this works. So.
Well, what I heard Richard Bromley say was, don't do the kind of referendum you're talking about. I heard Bromley say, let's do a vote on the generalized idea of it, and then if it's approved, go ahead with something like this bond proposal.
But we've done that already, Joanne.
I don't think
Yeah.
we did that at all at that public meeting. That was a total misunderstanding. People had no idea what they were voting on.
And they were just
David's comment of, yeah, everybody's in favor of Christmas. That's what that vote was about. It was about people
that
did
vote
not
was for funding.
understand that.
That vote was also to continue the study too. That wasn't for this whole thing.
Yeah. Well, listen, let's not relitigate this whole process. I don't think that is going to be productive use of our time. I think if we're done with the agenda, we could have some public comment. If anybody would like to speak up, we have several members of including Mr. Betts, I see here, who we've been talking about your very kind interest in letting us consider the land between you and the post office. But is anybody in the public want to say anything?
I've got one.
Hi,
here he
guys.
Tom
Yeah.
Bechtel here. I have a couple of questions. I'm not going to take up much of your time, maybe 5 minutes. Don the other night, he went to email all of the residents on our street and people who have expressed concern about the project in the past, He was going to email them the Zoom link so that they could be here and take part in this discussion tonight. And then we got an email saying that we were not to give out the Zoom link, and that anyone who wanted to drop in on this meeting needed to call the first selectman's office and get the Zoom link. Gordon, what was the point of that?
We're
I mean,
doing
all
that.
that, to my way of thinking, all that did was discourage those people. They don't even know this meeting is happening. So if they don't know the meeting is scheduled and is about to go on, why are they going to call the first selectman's office? Was this to discourage a large
No.
Zoom
So
group,
what
or
we have going on is, again, these meetings are scheduled. These are regular meetings. They're scheduled for the second Tuesday of every month, 5 o'clock, remote meetings. So that anybody that wants to know when these meetings happen, that's the monthly schedule that's been put in place for a long period of time.
Yeah,
So that's the meeting schedules. People want to know when the meeting is. That's the time, that's the place. Why we townwide, why we're having people register if they want to have agendas. We are registering, having people register because we have had a meeting Zoom bombed. As you may have read in the Lakeville Journal, this is going on in the area. And it is very disruptive. It's criminal behavior. It's very obscene. It's very racist. So this is the procedure that we put in place with talking to our IT people and the FOI people in the state and the state police who are still investigating what's going on, so that people get automatically. The advantage of this is if people want to get an agenda of any meeting, you call the selectman's office and you get put on this list, so you will be automatically emailed all the meetings that are happening in the town. That already is in place. That happened before.
Jonathan? Yeah,
Yes.
Jonathan.
I just want to say the agendas are also posted on the website, just minus the Zoom link.
yeah, I get that, but people sometimes need a reminder. And that's obvious tonight because none of the people who live in West Cornwall besides Don and me are on this meeting.
Priscilla.
Mark Wilson and William.
I'm sorry,
Betts is on.
Priscilla. I
Priscilla's on the
apologize for that.
committee.
Yes, you do. Anyway, it's just, I don't get it. And it looks to be, it's just another way that care has not been taken to involve the community in the project. So anyway, that's
I think
enough of that.
Tom, I think you have to realize,
I was
Tom, that this
listening-
procedure, excuse me, that this procedure, though, is not just for this particular meeting. It's for all meetings that are now taking place, and it's to prevent Zoom bombing from taking place. So it's not
Mhm.
specific to this board or this committee
Okay.
or this particular meeting.
Was Richard, can I ask, was one of these meetings Zoom bombed?
Yeah, not one of these, but the meeting of the new housing
All right,
committee was
okay,
Zoom
all
bombed.
right.
And it was very, very destructive. And it's obscene and
Well, we
racist
want to
and
grow up. Why do we make
awful.
rules that address the lowest of the low? Instead of
know.
raising up the skill sets of the people who are leading the meetings to cut these people out, we punish and we lock out and we keep citizen participation at a lower level. I'm
All
really
right.
disappointed.
You know
you,
what? I'm going to end this part of the
Did Tom have
discussion.
other
I think-
questions?
I have other questions.
Yeah, sure. Tom, go ahead. Yep.
All right, I just to address the point that it's great news that taxes aren't going to go up to fund this project. They're not going to go down either. With the school bond thing over, taxes had every right to be reduced. And if you don't reduce them, it doesn't mean that this didn't cost anything. Just to make that point. The new location, the Utzler's building, if something goes in there, does that mean that we're going to lose those parking spots, which are kind of the only parking spots in West Cornwall? We have a parking problem, and that's not going to help it. Also, you said before you've been to inspect the site and to look around. Has anybody made contact with the people who live in the Rock House up behind the post office? Those people just bought that house a couple of months ago for a little bit over $300,000. And I think it would be a courtesy to them to let them know that there is talk about, a change in the use of that property. That's a rhetorical question. I know the answer. So you don't have to get involved in it, but I do want to say, Dave Dolinsky, thank you for making the point that you made. The fact of the matter is that the people in West Cornwall have, this has been a terrible experience for them. We've been called polluters. We've been told that our septic systems are all failing. We've been told that we're not looking to the future of West Cornwall, that we're impeding progress here. And I have to tell you that from a public relations point of view, this has been a disaster. I think that unless you face that and you start doing something about it and being a little bit more respectful to the people in the community. These are the people, by the way, who care for their homes impeccably. They make this a beautiful town for visitors, and the sense of community that I've always felt here has been really torn apart over this. And this is going to go down unless there is a major change in the way that you guys approach this. And again, I think Dave has been one of the few to raise this point. And I was so happy to hear your comment. Anyway, that's it. I'm done.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks, Tom. Okay, are there any other public comments to come before the meeting? I believe that if we stick to our schedule, that our next meeting is going to be March 9th at 5 o'clock, which is another Tuesday. So unless there is anything further to come before this meeting, I believe we can adjourn. I'll take a motion.
Make the
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, that's Don offering the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Thank you all very much. And all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Okay, thank you, Lisa, for
Motion's carried.
thank you, Lisa, for running the show. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you,
Okay.
everybody, for all your
Thanks,
input.
guys.
Thanks, everybody, for their input.
Right.
Thanks, Steve.
Okay. Thanks,
I really,
Steve.
I really appreciate it. It's really helpful.
Yep.
Thanks, Steve.
Good.
Good.
Okay.
Okay. Take care.